Good morning and welcome to Face the State. I'm Tim McGonigal, and if you're a fan of CBS News, chances are you've seen the man to my right, Barry Peterson. He's an Emmy Award-winning correspondent for CBS News, and he's covered everything from wars to all kinds of stories across the globe. And as I mentioned, he's an Emmy Award winner, but perhaps one of the best stories he's ever told is Jan's story, and that is the book that you have written. And it's just an excellent book, and it's about your struggles with Alzheimer's disease, early onset Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, Jan was diagnosed at age 55, which is very young, although people can be diagnosed as young as 30. And because it's early onset for reasons they don't understand, it can move very quickly, faster really than sometimes than Alzheimer's that's diagnosed at a later stage. So we were living in Tokyo at the time. I was based in Tokyo and Beijing. We were going back and forth in both countries because I was covering both countries. And the book, Jan's Story, really talks about the struggle to take care of her and to fight against a disease that's never been beaten, and where we are now with her. So we went from diagnosis to placing her in assisted living in 3 years. It went very, very fast, and that's where she is today.
Okay. And tell us how you met Jan and that story and what kind of person Jan is.
I met her, I was a correspondent for CBS in the Los Angeles and San Francisco bureaus. So we covered most of the western United States, including Montana sometimes, as it turns out. And she was an anchor at the TV station in Seattle at KIRO-TV. And one of the things I loved is that she wasn't discovered at a drugstore and became an anchor. She started as a $2 an hour news writer. Then she became a producer and then a reporter. And then they said, try to be an anchor. Each time they promoted her, they warned her that they had to fill the job behind her so she could take the chance or stay where she was. And each time she took the chance. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about her, that she's really one of those people who not only loves adventure, but loved the idea of doing new things. And when we got the call where they said, we were living in San Francisco after we got married, and CBS called and said, well, what do you think about moving to Tokyo? And her response was, let's go. And when they called and said, do you want to move to Moscow? Her response was not quite so enthusiastic, but she's like, okay, let's go. And then from there we moved to London and then back to Asia. And on each of those occasions, I think she really embraced the idea of a new experience. I describe her as someone who woke up every morning thinking, this is going to be a great day, I wonder what's coming. The exact opposite of myself. So I think that's why I loved her so much, because I'm a Lutheran Montana boy from Sydney, with not that outlook on life, a little more dour, if that's the right word. And she was a wonderful compliment, and I felt so lucky to have her in my life.
And I think you said in the book that she celebrated life, and she saw the good things in everything. It seems like you talked about near the end of the book there, a trip that she was planning to Africa. You had been there before and seen some of the really tragic stuff that was going on there.
Yeah.
Yet she looked at Africa and saw the beauty in it.
And she said, we're gonna do this. So, and she was very clever in that sense. That trip, it took us a year. We saved up for a year to go because it's fantastically expensive to do a week or 10 days in Africa when you have two, in her case, stepdaughters, in my case, daughters who were along with us. But I think her attitude was, I was in a really tough story. We were covering a story after the genocide in Rwanda, and we were in the next country over. And there was a cholera epidemic, and people were literally there were bodies in the streets. I'd never been to anything like that before. And her sense, I think, when she heard what was happening, and she saw the stories, because they're going by the satellite through London, she's going and seeing them, was that it was really affecting me, as it did everybody who covered the story. It was not unusual. And she called up, and her point was, I think it wouldn't have mattered what the event was. In this case, it happened to be, talking about this safari, which was coming up and we were all looking forward to. Her point was to get me to pay attention to life and to pay attention to what was coming and to not be sucked into this horrible, horrible story. And I think that's one of the things that people who love Jan found so extraordinary about her, that she really embraced this. She really loved this, and she tried and often was very successful at sharing this with people around her, no matter who they were.
Okay. Also, tell us a little bit about Alzheimer's disease. For those who don't know, tell us exactly what it is, and then maybe about when Jan was diagnosed and how you got that news.
Well, the disease itself can be described as a series of roadblocks in the brain, plaques and things of that sort. But they build up, and what happens is when you have a thought from that cell to that cell, it can't get there. So that's why you begin to lose your memories and things of that sort. Short-term memory goes first at the front of the brain, and then long-term memory. And long-term memory tends to decrease by the most recent to the oldest, which is why sometimes people with Alzheimer's can't remember anything that happened now, may not remember anything that happened in the last 5 years, but can sit and talk to you comfortably about like their high school days as if they were actually still living them. A couple of things to know about Alzheimer's: there is no cure. There is no known cause. And I think the scariest thing is no one knows what any of us should or could do to prevent it. And people talk about diet and exercise and doing crossword puzzles or learning a language to exercise the brain. And the research to date shows that that has no effect that they have been able to see. And the worst thing about Alzheimer's is that it is 100% fatal. As someone said to me, I wished I had thought of this, but it was a wonderful, wonderful perspective. There are no survivor marches for people who've had Alzheimer's because no one survives it. So it is really and truly a death sentence. And I think that that's so hard to comprehend. I think in the world in which we live, dealing with diseases, and Jan had the same attitude at the outset. The idea is, okay, I've had this terrible diagnosis. Well, doc, what do we do now? You know, if it's cancer, do we do chemotherapy or whatever the disease is? And I think with Alzheimer's, they have some medications that treat the symptoms, but nothing that really stops it. So you really are faced with this horrible sense that you want to do something. We all want to fight for life. I wanted to fight to take care of Jan, but there are no weapons in the armory to do this. There are no medications. And you know, the single worst thing is we don't even know if Jan has Alzheimer's because at this point, the tests are not conclusive. All of the technology that we have cannot really see what's going on. And one doctor said to me, we'll know for sure after the autopsy. And I think that was like a slap in the face. You know, that this is what you're really dealing with. I'm looking at this absolutely beautiful woman thinking an autopsy. And I think that's one of the harsh realities of the disease.
It seems like another real tough thing is that with some diseases, cancer, you see the physical effects. You see results of chemotherapy and that sort of thing. But with Alzheimer's, Jan still appeared to be Jan, but her mind was slowly going away.
It's a really key point. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's really two things. One is there is no physical change. Jan looks terrific. If Jan were here right now, sitting where I am, you'd say, well, Jan, you look great today. Your hair looks great, and you know, she keeps herself in great shape and that kind of thing. So you're absolutely right. There's nothing that you would see about her that would say to you, well, this person is fighting for her life. And the second thing is, Alzheimer's, for some reason, tends to accentuate a part of people's personalities. Now, people who have been through this, who are out there, I'm sure are going to have experiences with this, that it takes some part of the personality. In Jan's case, luckily, it's taken the really good part. At the moment, she's really upbeat and she's really happy and she's in a facility and they love her to pieces because she's younger than everybody else there and the staff has fun with her and things like that. But you know, it can take a part of the brain that's mad or angry or violent and accentuate that. No one knows why and no one knows how to adjust or how to change that. You can drug somebody, but you know, how do you change this emphasis of this kind of personality trait. And it makes it hard, I think, in my case, it made it hard because we lived overseas. Jan's family and friends had not seen her very much. We've come back and visited a couple of times a year and things like that. When it came time to put her into an assisted living facility, the first one I chose was right in her hometown, just in Seattle. And people who went to visit her were like, well, wait a minute, that's still Jan. Why are you putting her here? She's still upbeat, she still smiles, she still laughs. And, you know, I am a grand master of denial now, having been through this process. And I think that what happened in this facility was some of Jan's friends saw her and said, well, this is the old Jan. There's nothing wrong with her. They didn't hear this woman who was once articulate and could do a live shot from anywhere in the world, who could now no longer finish a sentence. So it's a really cruel part of the disease. And just to add to the cruelty of the disease, you know, we were talking about how the disease blocks signals from the brain. Well, the brain's very clever. And so if it's blocking from this cell to your cell, the brain will kind of see if it can't get around. And when that happens, when it creates detours, people tend to come back a little bit. There are moments of lucidity. There are moments where the person can almost seem normal. And I cannot tell you, especially early on, how wonderful those moments are, because you're thinking, oh God, we're really making some progress here. You know, we're doing something with this. And then of course, it's blocked again, and the person goes away, maybe even a little farther. So the disease has this horribly cruel streak that plays with you in how you look, in how you react, because you're kind of coming and going in terms of your awareness. And I think it's, you know, there are no good diseases. There are none that are good. But there are many, many diseases that we can fight and beat back and cope with, and Alzheimer's is one that we can't. You just live with these effects. Try to be aware of them as they're happening, and as a caregiver, hope that you can stay with the process.
Right, and I was going to say, for a long time, from the early diagnosis, you acted as the caregiver. You were the caregiver, and that, in the book, you talk about the physical and emotional toll that takes. Talk about that, because it's very difficult on the caregivers and the families and friends.
It is, and you know, the statistics are pretty clear that in a lot of cases the caregiver will die first. And it makes a lot of sense when you stop to think about it. You're married, and I know you have a couple of kids, and I'm sure in your household, you and your wife have kind of come up with ways where together you run your lives. You know, you go to work, she balances the checkbook, she goes to work, you wash the car, whatever those things are, you guys really share, especially with raising the kids. Well, of course, with Alzheimer's, you don't have that anymore. You begin as the caregiver to assume all the burdens of running the house. And then you're with someone who's very unpredictable, who may be up and wandering at night, who may get day and night confused. In some cases, who may no longer know you to the point of thinking that you're not the person that he or she loved, you're actually a threat. So you can imagine the stress that comes with all of that. I did take care of Jan for a while by myself. She was diagnosed in 2005. I did it for a while. And I thought I was pretty clever about this, because I'd just call and make sure she'd turn the stove off, or we didn't have any danger of fire or things like that. But I had to travel with my job. And then that kind of wasn't working. So I hired a nurse, a woman from Tacoma, Washington, who came and lived with us. And I thought, self-delusion is a large part of this disease, trust me. I thought, I've got it knocked for a couple more years. We're going to be able to keep living our lives, and I have this person here who lives with us and watches over Jan. If I'm not here, it's taken care of. It lasted 8 months before I had to make the decision to move her into assisted living. And the reality of it was, the biggest problem was not Jan at that point, who was deteriorating, but me, because my health was going down faster than hers from the stress. And that's a terribly guilty thing to feel, you know, when you're dealing with this person that you love and you want to take care of that person and you want to make sure that person is okay, to have the sense that you're the one who faltered. And I didn't really realize until I began kind of talking with other people about this, that the caregiver faltering is I wouldn't say a normal part of the disease, but a definite risk when you're dealing with this disease. And it happened to me, and even though you know it happens, and even though people say, look, you know, this is a part of the process, I got to tell you, it doesn't ease the guilt, because you feel like you failed. You're the one who went down.
Okay. When in the book, when you talk about Alzheimer's disease, you refer to it as the disease, and you refer to it in capital letters.
Right.
The disease. Tell us why that is.
I think of it as a visceral enemy. I think of it as something that stalked Jan, and I think of something that I almost had to humanize it to hate it enough, because I hate it so much. And I do call it the disease. I make it like a noun, you know, like this thing I have to fight. And I felt through dealing with Jan that it was me against the disease. And, you know, something came out of that that I think drove a lot of decisions. And that was the sense that I knew the disease had Jan. I accepted and realized at some point that we weren't going to beat this back. At the stages where she started forgetting who I am, or didn't know that I was her husband, or had no idea who I was as a person. And I kind of realized that also the disease was taking its toll on me. And it occurred to me that this evil thing was going to take us both down. It was going to get two people, not just one. And this is not unusual in people who are in this kind of situation. And I vowed that I would not let that happen. I would not be the second victim of the disease. And, you know, I think in the book I do present it as like this battle, this epic struggle, which of course is silly because the disease has all the cards. You know, there are no cards that we have on the other side, except to not let it take down the person who is giving the care along with the person who has the disease.
Interesting. I love the cover of the book. It's a picture of you and Jan from some time back. Tell us about that picture.
We didn't know where it came from. We found it in Jan's mom had a drawer full of pictures, and we dug through them. We were looking for a picture and found that one in it. It turned out later that my brother had taken it. It was just after we were married. We were in San Francisco, 1985. He had a new camera, and he took a whole bunch of these pictures. And that's where the picture came from. And I think it was near the house that we had. We had this tiny little house in San Francisco. And I love it. I can't look at it very much for obvious reasons. Sure. But I think when you look at that cover and you see Jan's face, you know you're face to face with someone who just loves, you know, everything about life and loved me as I loved her. And, you know, I think that picture is in contrast to today when I go and sit with Jan, and Jan doesn't know who I am. She knows I'm still a person of importance to her. She recognizes that. If you ask her my name, she doesn't know my name. And it's funny because she knows Barry. She remembers Barry. And remember what I said about our memories kind of decrease. The Barry of that book cover is completely alive to her, still in her mind. Not this one. You know, I'm no longer that person. So she looks at a picture of the two of us and she doesn't know who these people are. And you know, someone said to me, several people have said to me, my parent has Alzheimer's. My mother has Alzheimer's. She's 85 or 92, or things of that sort. You know, it's not like what you're going through. And I say back to them, you know, it is like what I'm going through, because a mother should never forget you. A mother should never forget who you are. She gave you life, she brought you up, she nurtured you, and she was always there. Think of the horror of your mother not knowing who you are. And I think with Jan, it's very much the same thing. And it's difficult. It's hard to go see her. You know, we do that. We go see her because she loves having company. But if I walk out of the room and you say to her, have you seen Barry lately? She will say invariably, oh, I haven't seen that guy in months. Where is he? What's he doing? So there's no more connection in that sense. Okay.
Another interesting thing about the book, and very powerful part, I think, is the introduction. It's by your friend and colleague, Katie Couric, anchor of CBS Evening News. Talk about that and the importance, I think, of you as a fairly well-known journalist, and Katie Couric, being able to use their I guess, celebrity, if you will, to help raise awareness about Alzheimer's disease or colon cancer in that case.
Katie's story is well told. Her husband, Jay, died of colon cancer, and she has done extraordinary things to let people know that you need to be checked for colon cancer. I am convinced, and I don't think anybody would doubt this, that she has saved people's lives by saying, go and do this. You know, maybe it's not the most fun subject over dinner, but go and do this. So I have extraordinary respect for her. And I went to her because I thought, you know, we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's. I was about to say we're not going to beat Alzheimer's yet, but there are good people working on this. But I think she understands the sense of loss that comes when you lose someone at that point in life. And I think she also understands, because her life encompasses this, that you don't stop with the loss. You grieve, you are sad. She has 2 daughters. I mean, she had to keep on being a mom, and she had a job, and, you know, she's very high profile, but other people are in that same situation. They need to go on. And I thought that was the message that she could really share, to know what we have lost, to love what we had, but to remember that we still need to go on and keep living. And I think if I had to explain Jan's philosophy and Katie's philosophy, I think they both match in that way.
And you mentioned there is no cure yet for Alzheimer's disease, but there is some very excellent people doing some research. Some of those folks are right here in Great Falls, Montana at the McLaughlin Research Institute.
And I'm going to, I've talked with some of them, and I am forever stunned when I meet people like this. And we asked the head of McLaughlin, George Carlson, to write a comment for the book. And I think he said something fascinating. I won't say it as well as he did, but he said basically, it's easy for us as researchers to forget when we're in the lab that there are real stories behind what we are doing. And I thought that was an amazing thing for a researcher to say. But you know, McLaughlin is an amazing kind of place, tucked away in Great Falls, but doing literally world cutting edge research. And I suspect that people don't always realize it when they go by and see what they're doing, because, you know, they're these weird people who work with mice and that kind of thing. And I didn't really understand until some people reached out to me and said, would you be interested in, you know, being involved with this organization? And when I realized what they did, I was honored that someone would have asked someone like myself, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher, I'm not someone who does this. And yet, how many of our lives will depend on what these people can put together? And if their work leads to some way to slow or stop Alzheimer's, let me give you one statistic. At age 85, we all think we're going to live forever. Those of us who make it to 85, half will have Alzheimer's disease unless we can knock it down. So the next time you drive by this research institute, you ought to give them a high five and a yell, because they're out there trying to make sure that when you and I get to 85, because the stats are one of us will have Alzheimer's.
Sure, sure. And again, it's not just the person with Alzheimer's disease that's diagnosed with it, it's the family, the friends, and so it affects everybody. There's probably every one of us has some tie to this disease.
Yeah, and I would say that someone asked me once why I wrote the book, because I wasn't planning to write a book. I mean, this is, you know, my life. And I said, it's a lonely, lonely job to be a caregiver. In Jan's case, when she became less able to make sentences and things like that, you know, we really kind of stopped going out. We stopped our social life. I didn't want her embarrassed if we were with a group of friends, even friends. She'd sit at a table and just go quiet. So what happens is, and this is not unusual, your life gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I felt that, and I say this frankly, this is not a prescription for how to be a caregiver. For God's sake, read the mistakes and get something out of that. It's just one person who is doing this. But if you are a caregiver, if you have a friend who's going through this as a caregiver, if you're going to face this, it's one view from the inside looking out. And I think the point of writing the book was to say to every other caregiver on the journey, you're not alone, because you really feel like that most of the time.
You were able to develop a pretty good support system of other people who have been going through this. How important was that to you?
Critical. I cannot tell you that people who reached out, and I'm overseas, so it's like email and phones and things like that, but people who could reach out and just give me a little tug, tell me it's okay, say, yes, I went through this. And it wasn't like they had to tell me what to do. It was enough that somebody else had been there. And that's the point of the book.
Okay. How can people help? What would you suggest for people to do? I know there's websites out there, the Alzheimer's Association. How can people get involved in this?
It's a good question. I got involved by deciding that I would give proceeds from the book. 10% of my royalties go to the Alzheimer's Association. And let's give them a plug, www.alz.org. Okay. And they have remarkable resources. And their webpage is so good they can practically help you find support groups on your own block. I mean, it's really good. There's an organization in Montana. There's a memory walk in Great Falls that's coming up in September, where if you want to show support, you can go out and do something like that. And remember what I said earlier, there are no survivors marches for Alzheimer's. So if you have someone or you have been touched by someone, come out to the memory walk. It's in September, and I can't remember the date, so I'm not going to give it because I'll get it wrong. But you guys, I'm sure, will present some information about that. And that's a great way to reach out and offer help.
All right. And the book itself, it's available, I'm sure, in most bookstores, but probably online as well.
It is. I have a website that's dedicated to the book. It's just my name, www.barrypeterson.com. But remember, I'm a Montana Dane, so it's spelled Peterson with an E-N, because people tend to get that wrong. And you can read a first chapter there. You can see some of the reviews, including what George wrote. And then there's ordering stuff, obviously, and you can, get a hold of the book if you want. And I say to people, if you read the book, and if it helped, there's a place on the website, drop me a note.
Okay. In addition to being on this program, I know you did a program or a story segment recently on CBS Sunday Morning. You're going to be on some other, or have been on some other national media outlets. Where can we expect to see you?
CBSNews.com, Sunday morning. There's a story about Jan's story. You can watch the video. I didn't do it by myself. It was a real collaborative effort, but I think people who watch the story on the website will have a great sense of what this disease is and does.
All right. Barry Peterson, author of Jan's Story, also correspondent for CBS News. Thanks for taking time to talk with us today, and we'll see you on TV.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.